Wow, I'm really matching the decor in here today.
I felt my outfit's a bit boring.
You know, you always gotta have a straight guy.
Can't have bangers every week.
A loose guy.
Hello.
Howdy, welcome. How's everybody today? Wow, I'm so sorry. Or congrats.
Well, today we're going to start off by talking about the Dalai Lama.
My favorite llamas.
One of the best.
So for those of you who may not know, the Dalai Lama was in hot water this week during some kind of public event. There was, a line of greeting, and a young boy came up and asked if he could kiss him on the cheek, right? And then he said, asked for a hug, and then he said, kiss me here. And then he said, suck on my tongue.
Yes.
Which maybe if you're like a punk rocker means something. If you're a 80-year-old Tibetan, maybe it means something else. Yeah. But, for the vast majority of Western folk, that was a little shocking.
Bit of a faux pas.
Yeah.
To say the least. Yeah, apparently it is typical in Tibetan culture, I think, to stick your tongue out. Obviously not to ask kids to suck on your tongue. That seems to be taking it to a whole other level. So the Dalai Lama, his team put out a statement apologizing, because I think his team, I've heard, are pretty aware of the ways that the Dalai Lama could mess up, because he's not kind of tuned in to, sorry if you can hear that ambulance, because he's not super tuned into sort of like modern, political correctness even doesn't feel like the right term, because I feel like sucking on the Dalai Lama's tongue feels like it goes beyond political correctness, but you know what I'm saying? Like
spiritual correctness.
His team for a while has had concerns about him putting his foot in his mouth, or, because he isn't super in on all the ways that we prefer to be sensitive or politically correct or whatever in modern times. But his team put out a statement saying, sorry.
Yeah, and I think they also said something about, through a Western lens, that's so shocking it's not to us, which may have some merit, yet still. Yeah. It's like if you are going to be a global leader, and one who is, I think anybody who is interested in compassion as a subject knows that needs to extend first and foremost to the most vulnerable, and who is more vulnerable than children. And the way that we interact with children and talk about children, we need to be sensitive to those things. And so hopefully this was a good opportunity for the Dalai Lama to do a little thinking about that. Does he renounce his birth name when he becomes the Dalai Lama? Is his name like
so.
Keith or something?
All Tibetans are Keith.
Rick.
As I understand it, wasn't he identified as the new Dalai Lama at 2 and then whisked off for intense Buddhist training in all these ways? That is a funny hat.
It's so funny how religion always, it starts off with just, be kind, and then somewhere, thousands of years down the line, people have got the wildest hats, and you're like, how did it go from here to these hats? Every religion, Mormonism, look at the Pope's hats, look at Eastern Orthodox.
So the statement that he put out on his Twitter, and presumably other places, says, a video clip has been circulating that shows a recent meeting when a young boy asked His Holiness the Dalai Lama if he could give him a hug. His Holiness wishes to apologize to the boy and his family, as well as his many friends across the world, for the hurt his words may have caused. His Holiness often teases people he meets in an innocent and playful way. Even in public and before cameras, he regrets the incident. That's interesting that they don't mention the tongue sucking. They just say, a clip has been circulating where a young boy asked if he could give him a hug. His Holiness wishes to apologize for the hurt his words, of course. That is a pretty
it's a PR
apology, I'm going to be honest.
Refreshing to hear a religious leader even be able to make an apology. I wish it didn't have the PR spin.
Yeah, and it's also not from him, which is
it's like I'm just gonna say what the people around me are saying about me, and y'all can take it for what it's worth.
So, as I said, I've been a fan of the Dalai Lama for years, and I find him just a fascinating figure. For those of you who are curious about him, I listened to a really good 5-part podcast documentary by 10% Happier recently, where Dan Harris, who's a really great journalist and the host of the 10% Happier podcast, which is a Buddhist meditation podcast, he traveled to Tibet? Is he in Tibet? Where is he?
He's in India.
He's in India, yeah. Basically traveled to the Dalai Lama and spent time with him for a few weeks, and really took a deep dive into, I guess, everything around the Dalai Lama, his personality, how he's aging, how his ways of being hold up in the modern world, I thought it was really good journalism that took quite a balanced approach. But in that podcast, there was an incident that happened in another one of these kind of like forum Q&A type settings where a woman, I think she was from New York, I think she was in her 20s, came to him and basically her question in this Q&A was, I think related to grief. I think she had lost both her parents or something like that. And the Dalai Lama responded by like smearing cake on her face, which in the podcast, Dan Harris kind of dives into as like, you know, that's a potentially quite controversial thing for a religious leader to do because you are kind of like invading someone's physical space by doing that. So he kind of dives into like the potential ramifications of that. He interviews the woman who it happened to, and she said she felt like it was like a perfect, he perfectly intuited kind of what she needed in that moment.
Like an act of absurdism.
Yeah,
and
so
just silliness.
The Dalai Lama is known for these kind of random acts of absurdism or silliness or kind of like breaking down like so arbitrary social rules or, you know, just like these ways of being. And I guess that makes sense because he has from a young age been trained to sort of see beyond convention, I guess, and to, you know what I'm saying? He hasn't been immersed in like a normal social world. That being said, obviously, you know, him smearing cake in a 20-something-year-old woman's face, yeah, that's a bit questionable. Glad that it, you know, was a good experience for the woman. She seemed to like, yeah, it seemed to be a real positive for her. But when we're talking about a child and him asking to suck on his tongue, obviously that is a different thing. So though it may stem from the Dalai Lama's sort of personality and approach and may not be like related at all to anything nefarious, it's obviously still not good because you can't do that. And I understand people's instincts to be like, the Dalai Lama is a child predator just because we've just endlessly seen religious leaders be child predators. So I think that's a super understandable take, and I'm not discounting that is a possibility, that it came from a place of you know, like weird unconsciously repressed sexual desires. I obviously hope it didn't, but I guess my perspective on it is like I err on the side of thinking it was innocent, though like still not acceptable, and like he should have apologized. Yeah, inappropriate, but
a transgression more than a conscious.
Yeah, but I'm not an idiot, and I'm not discounting the possibility that it's more than that. I just think, I guess like based on what I know about the Dalai Lama and based on the evidence I have right now, that's where my mind goes, and I think it's good to be honest.
I'd say that we have a pretty like non-dual or non-binary approach, where it's like we recognize that everybody is actually totally a product of the systems that they are born into, because that includes your familial systems, your genetics, and then the environment you're raised in, of course, affects you. So he is a product of systems bigger than himself. And in some ways, the thing I find refreshing about the Dalai Lama is that he even though he is the head of like a monolithic institution, like Buddhism, the religion, versus Buddhism, the philosophy, which is something more of what I relate to. Like, I don't care for the religion of Buddhism, but he, unlike other religious leaders, sees the sort of facade of it. Yeah, he's you know. Oh
my God, it's hailing like
crazy. It's like apocalyptic hail.
Whoa, those are huge.
That is golf ball size hail. Watch that break my window.
Whoa.
I have to go look at that. Sorry.
Yeah, taking a break from our Dalai Lama apologizing. That was crazy. Where were we?
So there's a difference between the institution of Buddhism and the philosophy of Buddhism. And if you look at early Buddhist texts, it's all very
if you see
atheist,
the Buddha, kill him on the road.
Yeah, and very just like now is nirvana. It's not some place you go to when you die or that you can only get to through intense meditation. It's like being present in the here and now for what's real. But of course, as always happens with years and time and cultural adaptations and changes and things, new ideas grow and other things are added in. And so, you know, concepts like reincarnation and various deities and figures come into play. And I have heard the Dalai Lama say things to the effect of like, yeah, that's, you know, I don't, you know, I'm just a guy. We're just people. kind of like removing the shiny veneer of it all and letting go of the mystical things and just being like, hey, like, let's just be real, which I really respect. It would be like the Pope being like, hey, there's not really a heaven. I don't really have any like magic powers. I'm just a guy, but I'm going to try to do the best that I can. And at least rather than praying to imaginary deity, he's just sitting and observing his thoughts, which I believe is what the Dalai Lama and most Buddhists, especially those who take it on as like a formal practice and pursuit, spend a lot of time doing. It's just like observing thoughts as they arrive in the mind. So I do like that about the Dalai Lama. Now I will also say he also insists that people call him His Holiness, so which I am not down with at all.
Here's my thing with that. Does he insist that? Or
it's sort of a tradition, but it's like
so I was
it's a bad tradition, I think.
I agree, because I think elevating any human to that level is just a recipe for disaster. But I think it seems like with the Dalai Lama, he had this like heavy mantle of responsibility put on him at such a young age. And he has had to be a political leader as well as a religious leader, and he really has...
A political leader refugee, even.
Exactly. And so I think that comes into it a lot. Like, he has had to bear a heavy weight of responsibility for the Tibetan people. And so I could see him, like you said, he doesn't seem to be like this massive theist or to be too like lost in the clouds in that sense, but I think he does like respect the position, and I think he feels obviously the need to like uphold the position. But what I do like about him is that he's also, there are ways that he defies convention and refuses to sort of like stick to some arbitrary ideas about the role, because for example the Dalai Lama is apparently not supposed to dance.
This is the story I was going to
so I read the Book of Joy, which is like a combo book between the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu. I really enjoyed it. Gave it to my whole family for Christmas one year. None of them read it. They do not
make it up to Sam.
Joy.
Use the affiliate link and go get yourself a book.
But there's a story in that about how he was at some public event and like a child had said like dance, and he danced, which is a big deal because the Dalai,
like the Footloose town is just like no.
The Dalai Lama is not supposed to dance. So I've heard stories over the years that he is someone who defies convention, which I appreciate, but I can also appreciate how it would be a really big deal to kind of I don't know how to say this, but to sort of like denigrate the position of being the Dalai Lama too much, just because he is so responsible for like leading the Tibetan people and has been such a huge source of hope for them and such a source of strength. So it is a tough one, because it's like, it's kind of, I mean, I think I like the Dalai Lama more than the Queen, but like, for example, the Queen is, the head of this like old colonizer family, although apparently the royal family has only decolonized in the Queen's lifetime. Just fun fact that my royal apologist family members told me at Christmas that I think is true. But like what the monarchy represents in England, I'm not like the biggest fan of, but I also can see how to people like my mum, she is this like figurehead of hope and strength, and like she in our lifetime has been like very politically correct, and she isn't like perpetuating or she isn't like advocating for harmful ideas, though she is like represent. So it's just all messy,
all very complex.
And so it's like I honor the fact that like for the Tibetan people, having him as this figurehead is like so valuable, really helps them maintain hope in like what seems like a very hopeless situation. And I imagine the Dalai Lama feels that too. And so it's easy for us to be like, he shouldn't call himself His Holiness, or it's like we're not really like big fans of religious leaders elevating themselves in any way, and it's nice to imagine all religious leaders kind of renouncing those ideas, but it just seems so tricky with the Dalai Lama because of that element of it.
It's not like he just was a farm boy in Tibet who was like, I'm gonna start a grift and get everybody to call me His Holiness.
It's like at 2 they're telling him you're the next Dalai Lama, and your brain's been trained in that since birth.
And you're right, he does carry that with both like an austere dignity while maintaining his humanity, which is important. And it sucks that, and this is my general beef with religious hierarchical institutions generally, is that you kind of get forced into this situation where you have to be austere and removed and not subject to passions and in control. But that's just not the way humans are. We're like little goblin creatures, you know? And whatever you repress finds its way, or at least tries to find its way out in some manner or another, which is why institutions like the Dalai Lama's own institution of Buddhism, or like the monastic system we see in Catholicism, has so much rampant sexual abuse. Because there's all these people who are trying to pretend like they're not human. And so it's like, I love Buddhist philosophy. I love that, you know, people want to meditate and things. I disagree with the efficacy of total denial. I don't think it's healthy, especially when you get into these systems where that image has to be protected more than the human connections. So, like, you know, another beef that I have with Dalai, it's kind of funny, like, the types of controversies that he's in versus, like, the average person, where, like, you know, I saw a video of some actor talking about, like, glorifying rape, and he's got a show on Netflix, and everyone's like, the Dalai Lama, like, says the next Dalai Lama should be a hot woman, or says the next one should be a woman and she should be more attractive, and everyone's like, ah! And I'm like, the disparity is hilarious, because we expect this thing of this guy, but not of these people, because he's like a spiritual leader and all that.
Which is understandable.
But then on the other hand, you have like the Dalai Lama, who knew about one of the higher up lamas who was sexually abusing women for like 25 years. He knew. He was informed time and time again, and he just let it happen. Why? Because it's the nature of institutions to self-preserve more than it is to self-analyze and adapt and change. And protecting the image becomes the most important thing. So eventually, like 15, 25 years later, the Dalai Lama was like, I'm very sorry, we did something about this, but it's like,
too late, yeah.
Sucks.
Yeah, I wish I knew more about that specific. I would love to just watch a documentary on that specific story, because I'm not too familiar, but I mean, it checks out, doesn't it? Thinking about the woman comment, it's not a comment a religious leader should make, because you do have like a higher level of responsibility as a moral, spiritual leader, but I imagine it did just come from a place of like, you know, it was just like a dumb joke, right? He's still a human being. It's him.
And if like someone said that in a marketing meeting for they're like, hey, we need our representative to be a more attractive woman, and everyone's like, yeah, probably just optics alone.
Yeah. Okay, this is interesting. This is the Dalai Lama talking about gender issues. He said, Tibetan Buddhism is the pure tradition of, don't have to say it, Nalanda Buddhism. There is no doubt about that. And Buddha himself did not discriminate between male and female. The highest level of ordination for a man is that of Bhiksu. Similarly, the highest level of ordination for a woman is that of Bhikshuni. Basically, they have the same rights. Someone said, do you think the next Dalai Lama should be a woman? And the Dalai Lama said, yes, because firstly, there are already high female reincarnations among Tibetan lamas. Oh, yeah, so he said, I said half jokingly that if the Dalai Lama's reincarnation is female, she must be very attractive. The reason is so that she will have more influence on others. If she is an ugly female, she won't be very effective, will she? What do you think? Laughs. Yeah, like not.
The second half of that is actually worse than the first half.
I mean, he's not wrong. I know.
The halo effect is very powerful.
Do you know what I mean? So I'm like, it is true that a more. I mean, look at Till Swan, right? Part of the reason she's been so influential, unfortunately, to the detriment of a lot of people, is because she is attractive. So it is true.
It's how Mormonism gets all the followers. Russell M. Nelson is just such a hottie.
Yeah, but it's like with men, it doesn't matter whether they're attractive or not as spiritual leaders, but it does seem to for women, which sucks. But anyway, yeah. Obviously, the Dalai Lama is going to be. He's not like no one's perfect, right? And again, that's like the main issue with all of this is like anything that elevates a human above their humanity is just going to disappoint us, and so it seems prudent to me to like, however we can get away from ideas that elevate specific people, you know, that's the thing to do.
That is such an 80-year-old man thing to say.
I know. He's also so old. This is a topic that they dive into in the podcast. Again, 10% Happier. It's a 5-part podcast documentary. Podcast documentaries is kind of a new concept to me. It was so fascinating. Really well done. But they talked about how the Dalai Lama in his old age has got more, he really just focuses on like a couple of messages now, and his main thing he'll say basically when asked any question is like, 8 billion humans, or one. His main thing at this point is promoting interconnectedness.
Panpsychist Prince.
Amen. So the documentary was kind of like diving into whether that is kind of just him regressing as he ages, or whether it's showing sort of a, on some level, an evolution, because he's just like, this is the main thing always that needs to be talked about. But the documentary reckons with the fact that the Dalai Lama will have these like activists coming to him and asking him these like complex questions about how to help girls in Afghanistan, or, you know, these things that are these like very complex issues.
And practical.
And he'll still respond with this very simple answer of like 8 billion people or one. And so the documentary doesn't necessarily decide one way or the other if that's good or bad. It's just like an interesting thing to look at. But it is also worth mentioning that the Dalai Lama hasn't like historically been someone who is passive or who like steps back from complex political issues. Like he was
born into a complex political issue.
Yeah, and he has been a good leader in that capacity, and has like confronted these political issues head on. So yeah, it's interesting.
The not dancing thing is so wild. Again, I get why they like want them to be austere and all that, but it's like, that's so sad. Dancing is such a basic part of being human. And I see, and I'm glad that he's willing to break the tradition.
I think like the way I see Buddhism, or what I appreciate about what I think Buddhism is that it's about kind of like accepting the whole of you and just like observing yourself and not like denying certain parts of you, but then it's weird because then it feels like to have the sort of highest position in Buddhism, or in this branch of Buddhism, I guess, be someone who has to like deny certain parts of their humanity. I just don't really get that. It doesn't seem to make sense to me. Like, did the Buddha ever talk about not dancing or being chaste your whole life?
That feels like, because the Buddha's thing was the middle way, right? That it's not about total self-denial. It's not about total self-indulgence. It's that balance that when you just sit and observe without attachment, without judgment, emerges naturally. Because as we know from systems thinking, systems tend to self-regulate. And that is true for our human system as well as our collective systems. And so a lot of times it's just about taking that step back and allowing things to happen as they naturally would without our grappling and our reaching and our clinging and our constructs and all that.
Yeah, it's also interesting to think about a child as a toddler being taken away from their family and put through this rigorous training to become a religious leader. Like, you could make a case for that being a human rights violation, because it's like,
yeah, what about child labor laws?
Well, honestly, and also like basically just being told before you're even old enough to think for yourself that you will be chaste forever. You will, you kind of don't get a choice. Like, maybe in theory you could have had it, but it's like, how much choice do you have, It's kind of like we talk about with Mormon leaders. As much as people say that we're hateful and all that, I feel like we're always talking about the fact that they were born into these systems where they really didn't have a choice. Like, 1940s Mormonism in the US, like in Utah County or wherever, you did not have a choice.
Not a lot of options.
No, you would not even be able to like conceptualize life beyond that, probably for most of them. So, I do have empathy for these religious leaders that go through that. But then it's like we still need to be criticizing the ways that, because at a certain point, intention doesn't matter. And it's not even about like determining someone's character. It's just like, these are the consequences of like the homophobic shit Jeffrey R. Holland is saying or whatever it is. And I think with the Dalai Lama thing, like, there are consequences to religious leaders feeling able to ask a child to suck on their tongue, even if it was, innocent in this situation, which we can't know for certain. But, like, assuming that it was, it's still good to set a precedent for that not being okay, obviously. And so, hopefully it was innocent. And, I mean, I think there's some... this doesn't really say anything, but I think there's something to the fact that he did it in a public forum. Like, he clearly assumed it would be okay. I know that obviously religious leaders do messed up stuff in public forums all the time, so that's not necessarily saying anything, but you know, like the average Catholic leader wasn't abusing boys in front of a congregation. It's like you have enough awareness to do it secretively, but again, who knows? I guess he apologized. It doesn't seem like he has a history of things in that specific vein, and he is so that makes me think it probably was innocent, just for it to be. I don't know everything that's ever happened, but like if it is kind of the first incident of its nature that we've heard about, and he's like late 80s, probably a decent sign that it was innocent and just him being silly.
If anything, just very insensitive. I mean, it's like if the Pope did that, you'd be like, wow, that is so horrible, because even if you're not a predator, your organization has a big problem, and that's kind of how I feel about the Dalai Lama. It's like, you gotta have the wherewithal
because what happens when some other Lama who is a child predator sees that and then asks, so the repercussions are obvious, and you can tell that the Dalai Lama obviously wasn't thinking about that or aware of that in the moment. Well, I assume he wasn't, or he wouldn't have done it. I
know I was already talking about this, but the disparity between, if you just like look at the Buddhist texts, the original ones, and you know what the Buddha Siddhartha may have been on about, versus all the institutions and metaphysical constructs that get attached onto it.
Because the Buddha also wasn't like claiming to know anything about the next life, was he? I know, like,
he was very like atheistic, and not in the sense of like, well, kind of like there are no more gods, and like this is it's just like this is it.
Because I've always tell me what you think of this, but I've always kind of interpreted his stuff on reincarnation as, you know, kind of the concept of like everything's reincarnated from one moment to the next.
Yes.
And sort of the energy with which you bring to this moment is going to determine sort of the energy of the next moment, or what happens in the next moment. And, you know, thinking about karma, it's like Beef, I've been watching Beef. We're on episode 7. Who else is watching Beef? Let us know. It's like...
Speaking of the interview with the racist, the rapist, unfortunately.
Wait, really? Is he in that?
Yeah, the cousin who goes to jail.
Isaac?
Yeah.
God damn it.
I know, it's really sad.
Wait, he's a rapist?
He said, I am a successful rapist in an interview. And he's like going on about it, and the guys in the interview were like, oh, what color was her hair? And the woman, the only girl in the room, was like... what are you guys talking about? Like, am I going, like, he just said he raped somebody, and everyone's like, well, was she cute? Was she, she's like, what?
Did he mean it differently than it, like, did he have some messed up reasoning behind it?
Yeah, he was saying the only way he could get hard is if there was the fear of going to prison over it.
Yeah, but was he actually saying, like, I am a rapist and have
And then
raped?
she was like, you just called yourself a rapist. And he's like, yeah, a successful rapist. I was like, oh.
Does that... I'm trying to, like, see it
I'll send you the clip.
Okay.
Well, anyway,
but,
Beef.
Like, could it be...
Great show despite its casting choice.
But, like, could it be that that's just kind of like the role he plays in sex, but it is consensual? Let's fucking hope so. I don't know. I'll look into that.
It's pretty...
Damn it.
Pretty disappointing.
Damn it!
I know.
Anyway, like, if you respond to sort of someone's anger with anger yourself, you're probably going to trigger a snowball reaction in a lot of cases. So I guess that's how I look at karma. Again, I know I'm just like one white person and everyone's going to be like, you don't know shit about Buddhism. And that's probably true. I only know what I've learned through the 10% Happier podcast and just sort of my general interest in Buddhism and secular Buddhism. Secular Buddhism podcast, by the way, great. Highly recommend.
Oh, yeah. Noah Rashida, ex-Mormon, super cool guy.
Yeah, I have a lot of clients who have found, who have really appreciated the Secular Buddhism podcast, because it's kind of a nice, after you come out of that sort of nihilist place, it's a nice entry point into a healthier kind of spirituality.
With reincarnation and the Dalai Lama's emphasis on humanity being one, that is to say, like a single organism, in the way that maybe, say, like an ant colony doesn't operate as a system of individuals, but as a collective group. There's no just solitary ant, you only have ant colonies. And humans, and it's my opinion that not just humanity, but this entire planet could be considered an organism. And what you were saying about reincarnation is that when you really do zoom in, zoom out, start pulling at the threads of what reality really is, the actual fabric of what's going on here, you see that the world is not made up of things, it's made up of processes, that everything is flowing into itself. And, you know, it said that you can never step into the same river twice, you never meet the same person twice, because DNA is always changing. And the things that we are putting into our body is our cells are constantly cycling in and out, you know, like everything is in flux. And when you view the world or the universe as this singular process made up of smaller processes, in the way that you would consider, you can say, look, like that's a river, and what you mean like an infinite amount of tiny little things happening in this area that you call a river, which is water and mud and fish and frogs and sticks and all that. So I like his emphasis on that. That's the way I view the world.
Yeah, me too.
And what is going on here, that it really is just one thing. And the more that we focus on that reality and distance ourselves from the illusions of ego, the illusion of being a separate, isolated thing, the more we can make good change in the world. This is totally random. I was listening to Terence McKenna last night, who is like a genius and out there, is, you know, had some crazy ideas, but just like overall a good grasp on things, and who really like pushed the envelope as far as psychedelic philosophy and transpersonal philosophy and the implications of the psychedelic experience. He literally wrote the book on growing your own mushrooms. It's funny because the Mormon Church just said, you know, our prophet's words don't appreciate in value over time. And it's like, wow, the people whose job description is peering into the future, you're saying in the future their words actually don't matter as much. Okay, very interesting. And it's interesting to hear this guy whose whole shtick is like, no gurus, no teachers, like be your own guru, follow your own way. You are the compass that will, like, in the same way that a trout or a salmon will swim across the ocean having never received a single word of direction or a compass to guide, just knows by its own natural intuition what it needs to do. So we are like that. But it's interesting hearing this guy who claims no authority, claims no exceptional visionary gift or whatever, talking about like memes in the 90s, being like, a meme is the smallest form of an idea, and in the culture wars in the future will be fought through memes, and we need to make sure that we're replicating all the memes correctly. And it's like, that is amazing.
Yeah.
Someone whose words have only become more relevant with time. Anyway, like I said, that was just kind of out of left field. A little plug for old Uncle Terence.
While we're on that, I just happen to have a quote up on my computer by Terence that I'll read. So he said, ideology is not our friend. And he said, it is not a matter of choosing from a smorgasbord of ideologies and rejecting the flawed, the self-contradictory, and the over-simple in favor of the unflawed, the complex enough. Where is it writ in adamantine that semi-carnivorous monkeys can or should be capable of understanding reality? That seems to me one of the first illusions, and one of the more prideful illusions of human culture, that a final understanding is possible in the first place. Better, I think, to try and frame questions which can do it, and leave off searching for answers, because answers are like operating systems. They're being upgraded faster than you can keep up with.
Love it.
Yeah, me too.
The talk I listened to was the subject was like, is it possible for smart people to be optimists? He's like, it's very easy to be an optimist if you're a nitwit. Yeah. The more you know about things, the more grim it looks. But there is also hubris in feeling like you have it all figured out and that doom is certain, because we are literally just apes, and while we can perceive something and we have more access to information than ever before in the history of the world, doesn't mean that we know exactly what's going to happen in the future. Like I said, it's impressive when someone's intuition and ideas become more relevant in the future. Shows that they probably had a better take on it than our more traditional institutions do. But I do love that approach, that it's like, and this is, I guess it does tie in back to the Dalai Lama conversation, which is that, like, any time we elevate a person to be the end-all, be-all, the fountain of wisdom, the enlightened individual who has all the answers and all the authority, and if we just buckle down and follow that person, everything's going to work out. It never works out. Look at any institution, religion, cult in the world. It doesn't work out. There's always going to be abuses there because people are literally just people. We're a bunch of, like I said, fucked up little goblin creatures. These naked monkeys who crawled out of the jungle and are now turning this world into a gasoline-fueled playground. Like, we don't know what the fuck is going on.
That's why it's so nice to be free of high demand religion, and also to have realized in general that ideology shouldn't be too rigid, or that it's not necessarily our friend. Because I like the Dalai Lama, and when I heard about the tongue sucking thing, I was like, that's a bummer. Really hope that wasn't nefarious. But it wasn't going to affect my identity in any way. You know, it's like if I have to, you know, disavow the Dalai Lama, like, fine, it doesn't really matter to me either way. Like, I would like the Dalai Lama to be a good guy and to not be a child predator, obviously. But I remember being in Mormonism, and you hear something like that or something worse about a leader of your church, and it's just like that terror that sweeps through you, and your brain's immediately kicking into gear of like, shit. Like, how can I justify this?
Because your whole sense of well-being, your whole identity and purpose is anchored on some other person, a mortal person that's literally leaning on the arm of the flesh. Like, that's exactly what you're not supposed to do.
And it's nice now also to be able to be like, it's entirely possible that the Dalai Lama has inspired me in all these ways and has taught things that I really resonate with, and also has this shitty shadow side that is like really dark and dangerous. I don't like think that that's the case, but it's possible, and it's nice to just be able to entertain all possibilities without feeling like your sense of safety in the world is threatened by it. You know, it's like, ultimately, who cares? But I mean, I'd care through the lens that it would suck to have another religious leader who means so much to so many people be terrible, but you know.
It's almost hard to adopt any label as a thing that I am, because then it makes me feel like I'm in a camp that doesn't allow me to be anything else.
Yes.
So even though, you know, words like socialism are interesting and appealing to me, and I can say, oh yeah, of course I want to advocate for policies that improve the lives of as many people as possible. Does that mean I'm in favor of every socialist movement, and that, you know, we've seen the problems even with the best intended systems, or who claim to be operating from the best intentions, commit the most atrocities. And I'm not saying that, like, the USSR, for instance, is a perfect application of Marxism, because it certainly isn't. And that's exactly the problem, is that when you're like, we are socialists, or we are capitalists, or we are Buddhists, or we are this or that, it's like, well, then you've already made yourself put a boundary around what you are and what other people are. And
which is not very Buddhist.
Right.
So, like, to even call yourself a Buddhist is kind of not Buddhist. Yeah, it's a funny one.
And yet I love Buddhism. And maybe the only thing I like, usually when I'm pushed to it, I say I'm a Taoist.
Yeah, me too.
Because it feels like kind of the undergirding philosophy of Buddhism.
Because Taoism and Taoism recognizes the sort of pendulum swing, and that nothing is one thing. Yeah.
Yes. And I'm wearing my little...
is that yin
yang?
Love it. Well, I mean, something that is attractive to me about Buddhism is the, I guess, teachings around the fact that we label things and then we think we know what they are, and then, like, so much of what they are is then lost to us because they're in that category. And it's like, if you know, label yourself as socialist, then people are like, that's what you are. And it's like, there's a million, like, differences in the way that people are, like, believe in socialism or see so, you know, we have to do some categorization, you know, we have to do pattern seeking, we're pattern seeking machines, but, like, hold every label loosely, I guess, is just the point I'm making. So It's like, I could call myself an atheist or a Taoist or a Buddhist or, like, even a vegan, but it's like, I could also not call myself any of those things at the same time.
Right. All of them and none of them, in a way.
Yeah, so Taoist. And yet.
And yet. And I was thinking about that Zizek talk where he was talking about
Benny.
the Buddhists.
He's eating a plant.
how, in his opinion, Buddhism is the best philosophy that humanity needs to adopt for moving forward. And I totally agree, because it is about stepping back from the world of constructs, mental and linguistic constructs that we all dwell in, that aren't accurate reflections of reality. You know, you look at your tree and you say, I know exactly what a tree is. That's a tree. It's got bark and it's got leaves. And it's like, well, maybe not all trees do. And what does it mean to be a tree? And what is actually happening in this process of particles assembling and into a seed and then cracking open and sprouting into a new organism. It's like and this is the experience on psychedelics, is you realize the profundity of every mundane object in the world. You could spend your lifetime lost looking at a cabbage, finding God in it, you know? Because we don't know how this shit works. And it is fascinating, and it's beyond all our comprehension, but we're so used to just categorizing things in words: tree, bush, person, Democrat, Republican, Jew, Buddhist, Catholic.
Which is such an effective tool for division as well. Like,
Absolutely.
I mean, just thinking about Democrat versus Republicans, it's like not every, lots of Democrats have been fooled into thinking that every Republican is one way, and Republicans have been fooled into thinking that every Democrat is one way, and then that like gets people to deny each other's humanity, because it reduces them to the label, which is like inherently dehumanizing.
Yes. And I fall into that trap myself. I get into these things where I see, you know, the Republican leaders who are, you know, trying to pass child marriage laws where to keep children able to get married, and cutting off abortion rights while demonizing queer people. And then I get in my head that this is what all the Republican people around me are trying to do. And that may not be the case, and probably isn't the case. A lot of Republicans I know are like single issue voters. They're like, I don't want to kill babies. And it's like, that's their whole thing. And
and they genuinely believe it is killing babies.
Yeah, but they may have more compassion and more nuance than I would if I was just going by these rigid categorizations, might totally miss out on. And unfortunately, as you said, that is a tool of division that is constantly leveraged against us all the time, so that we're just infighting all the time rather than rejoicing in our shared humanity and doing things that work for everyone, which, in my opinion, is sort of a liberal socialist idea, and why they don't like it in the first place.
Yeah.
I was going to talk about Zizek and talking about the Bodhisattva, and how so there's a concept in Buddhism of the Bodhisattva who stands at the gates of nirvana and says, I won't go in yet. I'm going to go back and, as a gift to the world, try to help as many people become enlightened as possible. And I suppose that there is a lens from which you could see that as like nirvana just being eternity present now, and that death is just a reemergence into the great system, the great being, the one singular process, and letting go of the individual consciousness in a way that's nirvana. But of course there are Buddhists who believe that nirvana is like heaven, essentially, a place you go, or maybe like a bardo, an in-between stage before your next reincarnation. And how he was saying, Zizek was talking about the danger of that distortion in Buddhism, that mimetic distortion of the singular idea, which is inherent in so many acts of violence. It requires us to step away from what is real and present into a construct.
Yep.
And this has been a criticism of Buddhism, that, there's been genocides committed by countries of predominant Buddhists. And you can say, how can people who are devoted to peace and who understand the shared humanity of all do such an atrocity? And it's like, well, we all are capable of doing that when we feel like our safety and our families and things are threatened. And at the root of all those things, he was saying that this ability to like abstractify reality, that yes, this person that I'm fighting with is just another flashing image of samsara, and I'll knock them down, and then in 10 years I'll die too, and it will have just been a flash in the pan of existence, and none of it really matters, so who cares if I go and kill this person? Like, you can do that, but that is an abstractification from the here and now and the lived reality of the present moment, where there are two human beings who are in conflict who maybe don't need to resort to violence as a way of dealing with it.
Okay, I think about that a lot with Mormonism and I suppose Christianity in America as well, where most believers of Mormonism and Christianity would say that they believe in love, right? Jesus was all about love, but they've turned love into this like conceptual reality where love means being homophobic, because God, it's not loving to support gay people because God is homophobic, and so it's actually unloving to support LGBTQ rights. And so it's like taken love from this like real thing, abstractified it, turned it into this conceptual reality, and then they feel like they're being loving, but like the actual experience of like what love feels like in the body is not there, because love is like unifying and heart softening and heart expanding, and they are very much when they're advocating for these very like divisive, like cold view, like you can tell that they're like their hearts are closed, and like it's the opposite of love, but it's like you can successfully like recast reality by just turning it into a concept rather than being present with what's actually real.
Beautifully expressed. So Buddhism as a practice is really important. Of meditation is what I'm talking about. Learning to sit and just observe, just witness. Don't judge it. Don't be like, oh, is that the devil talking or is that God talking? It's just like a thought arises. I experience hunger. I experience horniness. And just that awareness alone is a powerful thing that facilitates change. I think the reason that people crave gurus and enlightened ascended masters and prophets and reishis and all this is that they crave structure. They something is hurting and they can't figure out how to get the reins on the animal of their own human experience, and they need someone who they think can just give them the answers. We all need help, and I'm not saying that you can just go it alone and that just meditating is going to fix all the problems of anybody's life. But training yourself to be aware of the things that are happening in your body and that are affecting the cycles that you are falling into repeatedly, that alone is powerful. There is a quote by Boyd K. Packer that I agree with, that he says, or at least if you change it a little bit, he says, true doctrine changes attitudes and behavior faster than a study of behavior will change behavior.
It's basically just like awareness is the greatest agent for change.
Yes. Yeah. And his whole shtick was like, pouring through the scriptures and memorizing these things and the words of men, and I don't buy any of that stuff. But the idea that again, changing it into awareness, I really, really think is such a powerful thing, which is why people like Dan Harmon, who, went from having a panic attack on live TV because Dan Harris. What did I say?
Dan Harmon.
Oh, he's the Rick and Morty guy.
Yes.
How he can go from having a panic attack on live TV because his life just feels like it is crushing him to death, to now being in a place of fulfillment, literally from just training himself to be aware. Because again, we are just monkeys, and who's to say that monkey is going to tell you how to live your life better than you can? Like, if anything, that monkey is going to take your money, and you're going to feel good about being part of something and having people with shared goals and things. You or your child may end up getting sexually abused by the dude, but at least you feel good, for a little while at least. Yeah. When all that effort could be expended to just training yourself so that you can be your own guru and your own enlightened master and find out what it is that's actually going on inside of yourself. Yeah,
because we as a species are not good at understanding our own motivations, and I feel like the best shot we have at understanding why we are the way that we are and what forces and assumptions and conditioning is operating under the surface of our minds is just by observing the mind, and also training it to not get so caught up in every story. And meditation seems like the best way to do that, So if we can be advocates for meditation right now, really recommend it.
This is from someone who hasn't meditated in weeks. So like,
that knows that they should. Yeah.
But when I do, it's always, and I'm not someone who's like, you have to do it every day, like praying or reading the scriptures. I'm not like that. It's a tool that you can use when it's...
And we're not moralizing it in any way, but I do think if you are not sold on meditation yet, I do think committing to like every day for a month is a really good way to go.
Because you will see the difference.
Because it's harder to sort of like grasp it if you do it more sporadically in the beginning. Yeah, I'm the biggest advocate for the Headspace app. I love it so much. It really changed my life because it was made by this British guy who has like the down to earth energy of like just someone's fun dad, but then is like he's like a trained Tibetan monk, I believe. And the way it's sort of, because I don't think many of us like really know what meditation is. We sort of like think of it as like, oh, you just quiet your mind. But I can't quiet my mind. So meditation's not for me. But the whole point of meditation is to train your mind to be able to be more quiet, or at least to, not get so swept up in its noise, and to maybe understand the forces contributing to the noise more. There's a lot more to it. I guess just from like depictions in media and stuff, I just always thought of meditation as like, oh, you just like get really quiet. That's not for me.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of concepts to sort of like learn and to build upon in your practice. And I feel like the Headspace app is the best thing I've found for like teaching line upon line. And it also does such a good job.
We should be sponsored by them.
I love Headspace. There are few things I'm a bigger evangelist for than the Headspace app. I tell all my clients about it, even like apologetically about how much of an advocate, because anyway. But if you've been like wanting to try meditation, I highly recommend. And I really, really think it's advantageous to commit to like every day for a month or something in the beginning. It's kind of like with yoga. I did yoga sort of sporadically for years, but I didn't like quite like get it, so to speak, until I did this year Yoga with Adrienne's every day in January thing. And something about showing up every day when you feel like it, when you don't feel like it, there's something about that like helps you like kind of grasp what would you call a practice better, or like the philosophy behind a practice better, because you can sort of observe patterns better when you're showing up every day instead of just and your brain will also just like get there faster just because neurons that fire together wire together. Anyway, it's been a good video. I feel like you've been on fire.
Thank you.
I really like the topic. I like how we got to talk about some more of our interests outside of Mormonism, though it's still related to the theme of the channel.
Been craving that.
When you were talking, I thought about a Ram Dass quote that he just posted. Well, he didn't post, his team posted on Instagram yesterday that said, "When people say, 'What should I do with my life?' the more interesting question is, how do I cultivate the quietness of my being? Where what should I do with my life will become apparent."
I love that.
I do just think so much stuff that we, and I've seen this through coaching as well, just like so much stuff that we think we need to solve through like external action or through
internal processing
or through like analyzing. It's really like a lot of solutions come through quietness and stillness, and there's just almost no focus in the Western world on stillness, and I think it's invaluable, and it's like one of the most overlooked solutions to like any number of problems in our world.
There's definitely like that yin yang aspect to it of like, I'm a fan of like cognitive behavioral therapy and trying to like, when I'm feeling anxious, I'll sit down and I'll write out what I'm feeling. And I'm aware that there are so many factors at play that go into how this organism feels day to day, that even though I may be like, oh, I'm stressed about my car finances or family situation or something, that the reality is I don't actually know. And it might be good for me to write those things out and to express and maybe see if there's something that I can do to change my behavior. But oftentimes it's exactly as you said, that like, I don't really know. I don't really know what's causing me to feel that way. And often the solution, though the processing helps, is to get quiet and to let the intensity of that cloud of ideas and possibility sort of fade away so that I can reapproach the system in more bodily peace.
Can't clear muddy water except by leaving it alone. Yeah, and I think we need the combo of sort of the like therapy is a good example of like, you kind of are like working at the level of the ego in therapy in a positive way, It's good to do basically both like the internal and the external is what I'm saying. And sometimes to sort of fix the internal, you need to anchor it in an external habit, action, whatever. But also a lot of the time, I feel like we can go too hard on the analyzing when if you do like a lot of analyzing and a lot of like externally focused solutions without the stillness and going inward, you're always going to have a missing piece there. I've been noticing, like last night I was anxious. I think it was just like random body anxiety, right? Like normal human experience. So I agreed to be a keynote speaker at Thrive Women's Conference. Ever since that, it's like anytime I get anxious, that's now the story my brain's attaching to it. And it's like...
Totally.
So obviously it's not that, because it's like I got anxious before and it would attach to something else. But now it's like that's my brain's go-to story. Like last night, I didn't really know why I was feeling like anxious. It was just kind of random. Maybe because I was watching a lot of Beef and it's kind of a stressful show. Who's to say? Maybe I was deficient in a nutrient. Maybe it's hormonal. Who's to say? But it's like, my brain was just like, well, it's because of Thrive. It's because I'm so anxious about Thrive. But really, that's just going to be the next flavor for the next 2 months.
I've been having that exact same thing also while watching that show and feeling that trigger the anxiety. Mine's just been around like taxes. I'm like, I'm going to make a mistake and then I'm going to have to go to jail. And it's like, I'm just like my body is just like freaking out and it needs, my brain is trying to get to the bottom of it.
Season, that's the story that's easiest for
until the next, and then once that's passed, it'll be something else. Yeah. And I have definitely got better over the years at just being like, I am experiencing anxiety. And it helps because then I'm not like, it's because of, you want to, it's my partner, it's my friend, it's mine. It's like, or maybe I'm just experiencing anxiety and I don't have, I think that's.
And it's so tempting to analyze to death and to almost like find a problem where there isn't one.
We crave, because we are these monkeys and we're so enwrapped by narrative and all these things. We want everything to be so neatly tied, and we think we can get to the bottom of pain. And like what I was saying earlier, if you pull on that rope of anything, of any aspect of being, you'll find that you don't get to the bottom of it because everything is connected to everything. You look at your pain and you're like, oh, this person caused me pain. Well, where did that pain start with them? Why were they motivated to do that? Oh, it's because they're in pain. And what caused their pain? Well, it was something else. You will never get to the bottom of it.
Which is why, though, accountability is important in our world. Like blame feels like such a useless concept to me outside of accountability, which is important. Yeah. But do you know, like, blaming ourselves or it's like, I feel like blame often acts as like a stand-in for deeper systems thinking, where you actually get to the root of what caused things,
right? Or
at least to like a version of a root of what caused things. Anyway, 8 billion human beings, all one. It's the message of this video.
And all the other beings as well.
Yes. Sentient beings suffer like we do, especially other mammals like cows and pigs and goats.
Oh, I cannot think about
sheep.
Cows right now.
I know. I had a real downer about it last night, hence my Instagram posts about veganism.
Any other questions, thoughts?
What do you guys think about the Dalai Lama thing? There's no right or wrong answers. We're just curious to hear what you think. I feel like we're going to get a bunch of comments being like, you guys are hypocrites for being so nice about the Dalai Lama. But
Hypocrites.
I'm just, that's my honest thoughts.
Yeah.
And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, and happy to own up to it if I'm proven wrong. But
yeah, I think the apology was much needed, even if it was unintended or innocent.
Nice that we're now in a situation where he apologized immediately. Yeah, I wish the apology had been like actually addressing. Like, it would have been nice to be like, while the Dalai Lama didn't mean anything by this, he can see that it's not a good precedent for a religious leader to set, we didn't get any of that.
This is the sin of public relations, and this is coming from a public relations student, and part of my beef with the church as a public relations student was being like, we're being somewhat dishonest.
Yeah.
And that is the nature of the public relations industry, is to try to cast the most positive perspective possible and to minimize the bad. But the problem is, again, it cuts us off from just like genuine human connection. What makes a good apology is when they can articulate why they understand what they did was wrong. And
Take
from
note,
here, I
YouTubers.
don't get the, like, a sense that he has, like, actually grappled. It was like, I did a thing, people got upset, I'm very sorry that people were hurt. Versus, like, I understand why doing this in this way would be exceptionally, like, would be a sensitive issue, given the circumstances, given what we need to, how we need to be moving forward in the way that our society, as a global one people, need to understand about how we relate to children, and the importance of our public figures, especially modeling that.
I wonder if that is something he, like, has been or will grapple with at all behind the scenes, or whether he's just like, no, my intentions were pure, so I'm just, it's not.
He seems like a self-aware enough person. Like, I don't know, it's like, you know, even if I get criticism on this, I may be like, that person's just...
But you'll still...
But I still will be more conscious moving forward and be like, how do I avoid even giving a person that idea that could be distorted into this or that, is right? And so I like to think he'll be more wise moving forward. Yeah,
that's so true. I mean, if I get a comment that's, like, negative about me that I can tell is, like, rooted in sexism, but there's, like, a part of it that, like, still rings true for me, I do still take it on, even if I might not publicly acknowledge that to that person, because I don't believe it was, like, said with good faith. Kind of different, but you get what I'm saying. Anyway, this has been good. We would really appreciate it if you would support the channel. You can do so by joining us on Patreon, where we're currently reading 80s Mormon fiction novel Stephanie, chapter by chapter. It's about a teen girl's struggle with drug addiction.
People are saying it's the best series we've ever done.
Are they really?
Yeah.
Even more than Adam? Hell yeah. So yeah, you can join us there and be a part of our little 700 people strong community. Or if that's not your vibe, we have a Venmo and PayPal, which is in the description box. And we fully rely on donations to keep the channel going, so without sounding desperate, please.
I won't say I don't have any money to pay back the government as it stands right now, let alone fix my car, but
tax season is dicey.
Turns out they take a lot of your money when you're not rich.
It's really infuriating.
Sending me into full-blown libertarianism again.
Rumpel revolution, guys.
Okay, love you, bye.
Love you, bye.